Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the Tajima Japanese natural whetstone. This is a Nakatoishi stone. It comes in the middle progression as such, and it is towards the later end of the Nakatoishi range. Probably falls within the 4,000 to 6,000 analogous grit when using the Japanese whetstone grit system, and maybe a little bit on the higher end of that. Insofar as what it can compare to for other stones that I've done videos on, I would say after we take a look at it, you're going to find it performs fairly similarly to the Aizu whetstone as well as the Tsushima whetstone. It maybe leans a little bit towards the Tsushima whetstone, but since those are not all that different in and of themselves, with the Aizu just being maybe a tad coarser, you'll find it kind of trades blows with those. So, as normal, we'll talk a little bit about the whetstone itself, where it comes from, and we'll also do a polishing and sharpening example, so you can take a look at what the Tajima whetstone is like and whether or not you are interested in it for yourself. So, it comes from an area mined out of the Hyogo Prefecture, which is just west of the Kyoto area. It comes from the northern Hyogo area up by the coast. It is not a particularly well-known whetstone. Not that it's unknown, of course. I'm sure plenty of people have heard about it, but it was not prolific through the market, is a better way of saying it. So as such, there aren't as many examples floating around, and within Japan, it was kind of more understood as a regional whetstone to that northern Hyogo area, rather than something that is truly proliferated like the Aizu or Nakayama, Awaseto stones. But, you hear them come up pretty frequently as a viable Nakatoishi stone. They do have a reputation of being very consistent stones, having few inclusions in them, and the ones that I've handled live up to that reputation. This is the one that I've kept. I don't see huge need for more than one in my collection or my progression, because it does kind of trade blows with the Aizu and the Tsushima and even some Nagura as well. Should you get it, I think that you can find them for pretty decent prices out there because of their lesser known status. They're not super common, but again, you can see them pop up every once in a while. And if you don't already have a medium to late stage Nakatoishi, yeah, I think that they could be really worthwhile for you to get, especially if you find that you like the color of it. You like the way that it looks, and it is probably a bit more of an interesting stone than a Tsushima Nagura. I think it probably leans a little harder, so it might be more, it might be better for a sharpener collector than a polisher collector, but it can do both just as well. But in my mind, the Tsushima Nagura is really great for polishers, pretty good for sharpeners. I would say this is really great for sharpeners, pretty good for polishers, and the Aizu is really great for both. You will find that this is a tad bit finer than the Aizu, but the step is not so dramatic that whatever you use afterwards wouldn't erase either just as well. That's the big thing, is that you could use it as a step after Aizu if you really wanted. However, let's say you go onto Shiage Toishi, a coarser Awaseto type of stone. Think like a soft Takashima, a soft Haka, something... a soft Ohira, some form of Suida, any of those, they're going to delete the Aizu scratches pretty much just as fast as they would delete the Tajima scratches or the Tsushima scratches. So while, yeah, you could add the Tajima after your Aizu to be a little bit of a finer step, it doesn't actually save you much time later on down the line of your progression. And, these stones are expensive, so to throw in something that isn't having a significant impact probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And the same thing's going to be true for sharpening. The difference that you're going to feel is negligible almost for sharpening. So I would say, when you're thinking about, do I want a Tsushima, do I want an Aizu, do I want Tajima, you know, and there are some other options that are around that as well. You're going to probably want to pick one or two to explore, one for use, the other for a backup, or switching between them for some fun if you're a collector. But generally speaking, they're going to trade blows for that position in the progression. So keep that in mind as you go into it. There are not really different types of Tajima. They all perform fairly similarly. Some of them might have a brown or orange line inclusion in it, and usually when you see that, it's going to be a tiny bit toxic. It won't be toxic in that it'll totally ruin your blade or stop you from sharpening, but it usually is a different grit range than the rest of the stone's makeup. But otherwise, inside the Tajima stones, they have some natural inclusions. Usually when we use the word inclusion, we're kind of meaning toxic inclusion, right? Something that's going to impact the functionality. But when we look at stones like this and we see these beautiful, you know, gray and black and somewhat bluish marks in there, those are actually all inclusions as well of some form of mineral or another, probably the white is feldspar, the black is some form of sulfur, but that's not a definitive rule, just usually what the colors mean. So these are inclusions as well, but they're non-toxic inclusions. They're softer than the primary stone itself, and they're not going to cause us any problems. So if you see a stone that looks like this, a very standard looking Tajima, sometimes the black spots will be a bluish, like a navy blue or darker blue, but they perform relatively similar. So there's, you know, unlike some of these other whetstones where you're looking for a specific type or version, has a certain color, Tajima are all very similar. And you know, you just watch out for those orange lines, kind of like every other stone. You know, orange or dark brown lines when you're not really expecting it. For the regular makeup of the stone are always could be concerning. It doesn't mean it is. So anyway, let's take a look at this. This is right on the edge of whether or not we want to use a coarser atoma like the 140 or a less coarse atoma like the 1200, which are usually the two I keep around. Today I'm going to use the 140. The stone would be a little finer out of the gate if we use the 1200. But I find that the 140, when I'm going to polish with this, helps because it's on the harder side of things. Again, compared to like a Tsushima or something, it's on the harder side. So the 140 helps to kick up a little bit more starting slurry, rough up the surface a little bit more. It'll get us some faster results with our polishing efforts here. And then I'll polish across the surface, so it'll mellow out the surface when we go to do a bit of our, just so you guys can see the feedback on the sharpening. So you can see it's pretty hard. I mean, that was 140 atoma. I was on there for a decent period of time, and we have slurry, but not that much. So that should give you an idea a little bit of how hard the stone is. Pro and con of that, of course, is a little bit less likely to self-slurry. It will, but very difficultly. And it's not going to conform to some like dips in your blade geometry as readily if you were looking for that, but it also will wear very slow. It'll harder stones tend to be a little better at sharpening, I think. So that again leans it a little bit more maybe towards the sharpening camp versus the Tsushima. I consider a little bit more towards the polishing camp. And with the name of Nagura, you can already kind of see that even the market considers that to be the case a little bit. So we'll just go ahead and take a look at our pre-scratch pattern here. It's just worked up on a Suida. It's nothing special, but it will allow us to have a polish that's over where this will deliver. And all the scratches that we see will likely be, or should be, right, from primarily this stone. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So the initial polishing feedback sounds a little rough. That'll go away real quick here. That's just the 140 scratches showing up. But once we smooth out that surface a little bit, I would say it sounds more like its normal self, not the 140. So we'll work on it a little bit. I'll let you listen. Yeah, that is much more closer to how it is on a more prolonged session. pretty good cutter. Feels nice. Again, it has good feedback. It might have a little bit, it definitely has more feedback than a Tajima, and it's kind of closer to an Aizu in feedback level. Might even have a little bit more because it's a little harder, so you can feel more of what the blade is doing, but I would argue different, maybe not more, it's just different. You feel more blade rather than maybe with a softer stone you feel more stone. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but that's how I think of it. So it's doing a pretty good job of cutting. It's not a stone that refreshes itself nearly as much. And I think that's where we see things like the Aizu or the Tajima kind of pull ahead for this polishing purpose. The stone is going to want you to refresh it eventually. Of course, those other stones can benefit from that too. But I find if I'm taking the Atoma or something to the other stone, the Aizu or the Tajima, it's more to flatten it out again. Whereas this guy, it does tend to clog. People usually call it clogging, but it's going to glass the top a little bit after we work on it. So right now, of course, we still got the slurry that we build up, and we have some that the stone released from roughing up the surface with that 140. But we're really just working the slurry now. The surface, I don't think, is going to be refreshing a lot moving forward, but we'll keep going. Not overly thirsty, we didn't cover that before, but you can kind of tell already that I'm giving it water here or there, but really not a whole lot. It doesn't really suck up a whole much. It dries out. The surface dries off quickly because it's not penetrating deeply with the water. Again, it's a hard stone, so you'd think that would be the case. Alright, I think we've spent enough time. Let's go ahead and see what we get. Alright, so here's what we ended up with. And this is always the hard part of these videos, so I'll do my best to get it closer. And as before, we'll try some autofocus, just because it's really hard to get this, so I try as many different versions or ways I can try to get you guys to see it as possible, so you can have a really clear understanding of what the stone does. Okay. So it's a nice stone. I mean, I will say I enjoyed using it. I think it did a good job for what we were looking for. And visually, it does scratch both the core and the cladding of the stone. Not the stone, of the knife. But it's a very clean, polished scratch pattern on the core, very near to being fully deleted, and again, that Nakatoishi, Suida, Takashima, soft Awaseto stones would clear that up in a heartbeat. And it did leave a discernible scratch pattern on our cladding, which again, to me, is very reminiscent of an Aizu scratch pattern, a Tajima scratch pattern, and it would be deleted quickly after. They're not deep scratches, but once again, if we compare it to those stones, it performs fairly similarly. So if you already have those, I'm not sure that Tajima is going to give you a whole lot of additional use case. If you only had a Tsushima Nagura and no Aizu, and you were considering this for sharpening, I think it could be a winner for that. But even then, you know, I don't know if it's actually worth the money. The Tsushima can do a very good job at sharpening as well. So let's go ahead and get this off here. It gives you a nice shot of the stone as well, I suppose. All right. Yep, we're clean. And we'll go ahead and sharpen up a little bit. You'll be able to hear the feedback and see how it generates mud or cuts the metal. And we'll go from there. So this is kind of what I was saying when we were, I'll keep going, but this is kind of what I was saying when we were polishing with it, is that they don't really tend to want to refresh themselves as much, and I think we're seeing that a little bit here by a lack of swarf generation. We want to see the metal particles coming up. Of course, it is also a darker stone, so there's a chance that we are getting cutting. I can feel feedback like we're getting some cutting on the blade edge, and it is ever so slightly there, but it's not going particularly fast. And again, that's because the surface of this wants to be refreshed before we do this. So for sake of the stone, I think we've done a decent job of, I mean, it will cut, but it's going to go real slow. So let's go ahead and grab to just do it a little different here. If I do the 140, it's going to get pretty coarse again until it mellows out. So we'll do the 1200. I think that one of the nice things about these late stage Nakatoishi stones is that you can do a 140, you can do a 1200, and you can drastically change the characteristics of how it's giving you feedback, how it's polishing, how it's sharpening, which is really fun. It gives you a lot of options to work with. And this stone, because it does kind of exhaust a little bit like that, you can kind of play with how it finishes a knife. And if you wanted it to be the finisher for a kitchen knife, you know, you could do a water only, you could do a slurry, clean it off, a water only finish, and you would be able to push its fineness up a little bit more because the surface can mellow out like that. Some stones that refresh so quickly are not always good for trying to do that water-only finish at the end. But you can see it's actually not an overly hard stone when it comes to refreshing. We got a decent amount of slurry with them with very little effort. But it doesn't want to give it up on itself, or on its own. So let's go ahead and try again here with just a small amount of slurry pre-added. Man, it is hard to get it to show up. Maybe it's the darkness of the stone. It is there. It is going a little faster with the slurry, but I mean, if you compare this to some of the other videos where we've sharpened, it's not fast, right? It's not, I feel the Aizu just generates the swarf real fast. And even the Tsushima maybe moves a little faster than this. But this is very pleasant, it gives a nice feedback, it is smooth, it's quite clearly when you're using it and feeling it, it's very pure stone. So it has its place. I don't think it's, I mean, maybe the best way of saying it is that there might be a reason why it was a regional stone and it didn't take off all across Japan like some of the other stones did that are comparable to it. But I think it's fun. If you're a collector, it can be worth it just to have one. I think it's a unique looking stone. And it is useful still, but I think you're going to spend a little bit more time on it getting similar results. But it's pretty good. I think it needs a little bit more time just to get some refinement. Yeah, I mean, it leaves a nice edge. Let's do a water-only finish. And maybe that's one of the things that we could say is in the pro column for it. That because of how the surface is, it's a little harder. I think you can, you know, we say the Aizu, the Tsushima, the Tajima are in that 4,000 to 6,000 range. I think maybe this has an easier time a little bit unlocking for sharpening that higher level range. For polishing, I don't find that it wants to comply as much. It just tends to feel like it has exhausted itself. So we'll go nice and light. Some water only. We're still definitely getting feedback. It's not just gliding, you know, like it's not doing anything. It's at a microscopic level, it's still cutting. But it's not a very aggressive stone. That leaves a pretty refined feeling edge. Yeah, that's nice. That would work well in a kitchen as a pre-razor, maybe a bevel setter, you could do that. But again, it's a little slow for bevel setting or refreshing the bevel. So it works, right? If you wanted something that was a kitchen knife sharpener, if you wanted to use it as a late Nakatoishi progression and you were not looking for the most blazing fast stone, but something that was pure and reliable, fun to use, I think that this is a good fit. As with a lot of these rare stones that have a good look to them, the Natsuya comes to mind. I kind of, even though they're not the same level of Nakatoishi, they can have similar feelings in the sense that they're a rarity and that they look pretty nice, kind of negatively impacts their ability for them to hold a really valuable place in the market because it drives up the price. So, I mean, I think you can find these for $250 to $300 in a block that's like this. That's not bad. I mean, that's not too much different than an Aizu or a Tsushima. Probably more in line with an Aizu price, right, for this type of a block. The Tsushima should be cheaper for a block that's like this. For Tsushima, maybe a little longer, a little not as tall, but very comparable. You're going to spend less than $200 getting that. So knowing that the Tsushima is out there, I think the Aizu gives you, if you dump down to the 140 with an Aizu, you get a coarser experience. If you use a 1200 with the Aizu, or you work the surface quite a bit, or use a Nagura with the Aizu, you can get similar performance. It is hard to say that this, you know, should overcome those options because either you want to polish, you want that little higher end range, you get a cheaper Tsushima, or you have an Aizu which is similar but probably a wider range of functionality. However, I think this is cool. I still like having it. I don't plan to get rid of it. It's a good quality whetstone, and I think it's fun to pull it every once in a while. So that's my opinions on it. You might, you know, if you fall in love with it, I'd say get it. It's not going to disappoint you. Just know what you're getting into when you get it, as is true with all of these natural whetstones. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that this gave you the information you wanted about the Tajima Japanese natural whetstone. If you want to see more videos, do the normal YouTube like, subscribe, comment, and otherwise, until next time. Thanks.